Okay, we do expect President Trump will hold one more event late tonight here in the States. That's because it's daylight out in South Korea. That's where the president just landed moments ago, meeting with the South Korean president. We saw also the fighter escorts that were leading Trump to Jeonju, South Korea. Important to note, by the way, Jeonju, hours away from Seoul and even further away from the North Korean border than Seoul is. Lots to discuss about Trump's swing through Asia. As I mentioned before the break, he has now stopped in 3 countries. It began with Malaysia, Japan, now wrapping up in South Korea. He will be meeting with South Korean leaders. He'll also meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping. There is still a question as to whether or not he will meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. Let's discuss everything we've seen so far throughout this Asia trip with retired Marine intelligence officer, national security analyst, and host of the Strap podcast, Hal Kempfer. Hal, looking ahead, what indicators are going to tell us whether or not Trump's swing through Asia was a success or not?
Well, Austin, I think some of the indicators are already there. He signed a number of agreements. I thought what just came out of Japan was rather remarkable. Obviously, a lot of shared interest, but $500 billion, or almost $500 billion in investments going into the U.S. It's a huge amount of money. But also he kicked off the whole thing with that essentially peace agreement, if you will, between Thailand and Cambodia on that border dispute issue. And then he signed agreements with basically reciprocal trade agreements with Thailand and Cambodia as well. He signed a big trade agreement with Malaysia. He's just been kind of swinging right through. Now he's doing Japan. And he's also got an agreement out there with Vietnam as well. And now he's heading off to Korea. Now, South Korea could be the toughest one. There's a proposal out there for $350 billion in direct investment from South Korea into the U.S. And the South Koreans are having basic financial structural issues moving that much money to the U.S. to do that type of investment. They're very, very concerned they could significantly destabilize their internal financial system within South Korea. So there's going to be a lot of discussion on that. They may hit an agreement, but there may be some interesting ways that they have to do this financially in order to prevent a major financial disruption in the South Korean markets.
So let's talk about China for a moment. That's going to be one of the main facets of this South Korean leg of the trip that we're going to be following is Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping. Earlier this week, Hal, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that 100% tariffs on Chinese goods are effectively off the table. What are we going to be listening for during Trump's meeting with Xi?
I think we're going to listen for, first off, the rare earths issue is going to be big. That's going to be something we're trying to get them to back down on. I think we're pretty close to that. And we had some rare earth success with Malaysia. A little bit different story, but we had some success there. So I think we're going to see that come out of it. And I think we're going to see a lot of other issues get addressed with China. I don't know that they've got everything in place to announce a big deal yet. It sounds like there's still a lot of stuff. So it sounds like it'll be a very cordial meeting. A lot of it, very positive language, I'm sure, about the agreement to come or something like that. But it doesn't sound like they're going to be inking anything coming out of this, at least unless something really radical has changed. And I don't put aside the possibility that while everything else has been going on, that the negotiators have been working really, really hard to put something together. So when they meet, they do have something assigned. That's very possible. But everything going into this so far sounds like it'll be a very positive, cordial meeting. There'll be a lot of good intent stated, but I don't think there'll be anything signed. One of the interesting things with the backdrop of that is here you have President Trump going in to meet Xi Jinping, all right, and they're going to talk cordially and all these other things. And then you just heard Secretary Hegseth with his Japanese counterpart talking about, very frankly, about the threat of China and what that poses to both of our countries. And I just find that kind of juxtaposed to be rather interesting. it kind of says, this is the real world backdrop of everything that's being said in Korea with that meeting.
So, how would we describe Trump and Xi's relationship at this point? There's been some ebbs and flows this month.
They seem to get along pretty well, from a personal standpoint. Now, one of the interesting things, it gets some press in the West, but not much. He's basically purging his military. He's been going through and locking up, top generals. If we were to do something like that in the West, I think if you thought there was enough political rhetoric right now in the U.S., nothing like this has ever been seen before, except if you want to go back to Stalin's Russia or Stalin's Soviet Union, where he's just going through and he's locking up these very senior generals who've been around forever, charging them with corruption and basically purging the ranks. And there are some very serious questions. Part of it was, if you look at their military, I think he kind of hit the reality that I'm not saying China is a paper tiger per se, but a lot of their military, they just didn't have the wherewithal, the capabilities, the operational savvy to do some of these big things that they talk about doing. They look great in parades, but when you get down to all that detailed coordination, all that detailed command and control communications things that we are so good at, they weren't quite there. And I think he finally realized that he had a military hierarchy that wasn't really up to speed. Now, whether he's going to be putting people in place, I don't know, but that's kind of a backdrop thing. That's something that President Trump has to look at from a national security standpoint. And he's going to be assessing that going right into it, which is what is actually happening in China? What is actually happening with the Chinese military threat? Did it just slow down because of this? Is it changing? Could Xi be open to a bigger deal with all the internal problems he has? It is kind of a fascinating point in time that this meeting's taking place when all this other stuff's happening in China.
We've had, for much of the evening here, we've had live images of either the airports or the tarmacs or Marine One or Air Force One landing in South Korea, Japan, as the president has made his movements. We have no live feeds coming in right now. Our understanding is that President Trump will, within the next hour or so, we expect, make some remarks on the sidelines. By the way, the reason why he's in South Korea is because of the APEC summit. That's why a number of leaders throughout Asia are meeting in South Korea. Let's talk about the APEC summit, Hal. The APEC forum, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that it promotes is free trade. So how does that play into Trump's history of pushing for higher tariffs and in some cases on member countries?
Some might see a little bit of friction between what the U.S. has been doing. We have always been pushing free trade very hard, but we're pushing free and fair trade, which is kind of interesting. And there's certainly some very interesting U.S. political history behind that. But what we're doing is we're pushing this really more fair trade than free trade, which is kind of goes against the grain of APEC. But one of the things within APEC is they get along, but but with that said, there's always a lot of differences, and they kind of gloss over that, if you will, in a lot of the meetings. But there are a lot of some interesting things just below the line that they still have to work out with a number of different countries on trade. And it's not just tariffs. Everybody sees tariffs. Certainly President Trump has probably said tariffs more times than probably any president has in the last 50 years. But there's also these non-tariff barriers, and that's one of the things that he's been working through with all these countries. And one of the interesting things coming out of Japan, for example, is that Toyota is going to be importing American cars. And I know that sounds very strange, but the non-tariff barriers in Japan, we see the same problem over in Europe, have basically been this major obstacle towards the U.S. exporting cars and other industrial industrial goods that we make in these countries. So it is rather interesting that he's kind of turned that around, if you will. And I'm wondering if that's going to be a model that they talk about with some of the other APEC countries. Is things along those lines to do these more reciprocal deals. It seems that reciprocal deals is kind of the phrase that he's been using constantly throughout this, and it's less a regional approach than a country by country approach. There's regional impacts, but it seems to be more country by country. So it's going to be a very different type of APEC conference. We hosted the APEC a couple 3 years ago in San Francisco, and I think this is going to be a very, very different conference than what was seen there. And that was one where Xi Jinping came to the U.S. And of course they had a sidebar there as well.
So, Hal, one thing that we're going to be watching for in South Korea, and by the way, they're not meeting in Seoul. They're meeting in Jeonju. This is an area that you're familiar with. I was just in Seoul myself. Seoul is fairly close to the North Korea border. Jeonju is further south. So the geography of this visit, Hal, does it feel unlikely that we'll see a Trump-Kim Jong Un meeting this time around?
Yeah, the geography is going to be part of it. Now, keep in mind, he's got Marine One there, and they can pop on a helicopter and they can fly up north if they want to. And you saw they have lots of Army helicopter escorts with them because we have a fairly significant force presence on the Korean Peninsula. So it's always possible he could go up there and they could do something, on the line at the DMZ and possibly shake hands. I don't rule that out. I just haven't seen anything announced that's really concrete, other than a desire to do so. Here we are. He's actually in South Korea, and we still haven't heard anything concrete about that type of meeting. I think he really wants to focus right now on what's in front of him, and there may be stuff going on in the background to set something like that up, but I don't think he wants to do anything that's going to take away from the meeting with Xi that's coming up, and of course in the APEC conference himself. So I think he's going to kind of focus on that right away. Now, it's interesting geography. It's not only on the other part of the country; it's on the other coast. It's completely opposite, and that city is actually kind of a historic city. It's one of those cities that has a lot of historic buildings that are very much intact. You may recall during the Korean War that a lot of Seoul was literally just destroyed, and a lot of the industrial cities were devastated during the Korean War. This city is actually able to maintain a number of historic sites. Now they're going to be so busy that the nation, the national leaders probably won't have a chance to see a lot of what's going on there. But it is going to make a rather dramatic backdrop, and it's a chance, I think, for South Korea to kind of showcase South Korean culture and history in a way they haven't been able to date.
This is a live vantage point. We're now getting a shot inside of the room where Trump is expected to speak here shortly. By the way, he just sent out a post on Truth Social saying, for those that are asking, we didn't come to South Korea to see Canada. Obviously, Trump continuing his feud. Canada is a member of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. He's presumably talking about some Canadian officials who may be there at the APEC summit. A bit of a cryptic message. We're trying to decipher ourselves here in the newsroom, Hal. We were looking at some video moments ago of Trump meeting with the Japanese leader. This is his first time meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Tsunade Kaichi. She and him, they signed a framework agreement securing the supply of critical minerals and rare earths through mining and processing. While we're talking about all these deals, this deal that they signed about the minerals, how significant is this in reducing reliance on China's near monopoly of these types of supplies?
Well, China has, and I think we've talked about this before, China doesn't lock in all the rare earths. And I should point out, rare earths are not actually that rare. They're rare to find in the earth because they're just not plentiful, but rare earths actually are found around the world. Yes, China has some key deposits within China. What they did very strategically in the 90s, in the O's, and into the teens was they really undercut the rest of the world in the processing of rare earths. And they got a 90% control on the processing. And this impacts the U.S., it impacts Japan, it really impacts the Europeans. And I have, as you know, I have some history in consulting in this industry as well. And so what this does is it aligns the U.S. with Japan both of us are major consumers of rare earths. We both need that, not the least of which for all the defense things that we just talked about, that Secretary Hegseth just talked about. And it allows a kind of a larger force in the global market. And that's important when you're dealing with other countries where these rare earths are found, whether you're going to South America or Africa or somewhere or in Asia. If you have a larger group that you can represent with a common purpose, that really does help, because Japan, I mean, I should say China, is somewhat monolithic, not only in the current market position, but also in terms of just their economic size. So if you combine the US economy with the Japanese economy, you get a very big combined economy. And that gives you a very big bargaining position when you're dealing with some of these countries around the world where the rare earths are found, and also countries where we might want to set up some sort of processing operation, perhaps joint processing operations that are both Japanese and the U.S. Around the world to help with our rare earths demand needs.
So while we wait for President Trump to make some remarks here at the APEC summit, what would you say was the key priority on this swing through Asia? Was this an economic focused meeting? Was this a national security focused swing? Which one was the chief priority here?
I would say it was economics and trade. But with that said, it's all interlinked with national security and regional security as well. I mean, right now you look at China; they pose this huge threat in the in the South China Sea and in the West Pacific as a whole. It's a threat that's felt by every country there. It's a threat that's felt in certainly in Malaysia. It's a threat that's felt by other countries, in the region all around, for example, the South China Sea, which is, the Philippines, Indonesia feels it, certainly Vietnam. And then you start heading up north, I can't say enough about Taiwan, but then and Japan feels it. And there are disputed territories that they still disagree with as well. So everyone has a common feeling of the threat, if you will, that comes from that. And with that, they also see the economic threat, particularly when China, pulls out this thing what they just did with rare earths, something everybody knew about, but now it's on the table. It's very much in front of everybody. And so it really adds a sense of urgency for all the other countries to work together to reduce our vulnerability to some of these economic uh, constraints that China has imposed on the world system. And rare earths is a big part of that. And it's not just rare earths, there's other things that they do as well.
So I got to ask you one more thing about North Korea before we go here. I was speaking with some of the folks that follow this stuff closely, the political body, if you will, in South Korea. The more progressive party, the Liberal Party, if you will, they tend to have a more cush relationship with China, if you will, whereas the Conservative Party tends to be more friendly to the Americans, I've learned, Hal. The president of South Korea currently is of the Progressive Party, he's of the Democratic Party of Korea. So I guess my question to you would be, would the U.S. get anything out of a friendlier relationship between North and South Korea? Would a friendlier North and South, or perhaps even a reunified Korea itself, benefit the U.S.?
Well, the reunification of the two Koreas has been on the table for, well, forever. Okay. Everyone says that, but what would it look like is the big question. And right now, the Hermit Kingdom up north is basically it's economically bereft. I mean, it's a country that just doesn't really have a significant economy. Its agricultural sector is horrible. Its industrial sector is horrible. Russia has been propping it up. China's been propping it up. They have nuclear weapons. That's really the big thing. And they went that way with nuclear weapons after, playing the West forever, saying, oh, no, no, we won't develop nuclear weapons, and taking as much aid as they could with that pledge, and then turn around creating and building nuclear weapons, testing nuclear weapons. And it's because the rest of their military structure had just basically worn itself out. There was old Soviet equipment. They were not going to be able to do anything significant in a conventional military manner, so they had to go with these nuclear weapons. So if it could do something that would reduce the nuclear threat, as you saw in Seoul very recently up close, North Korea is right there, is looking down, and it's not just big ICBMs, or they don't have to have ICBMs. They're within artillery range of North Korea. They're within tactical rocket range of North Korea. North Korea has not just nuclear, but they have chemical weapons and other things that they could fire into Seoul. And as you saw with Korea, Seoul, South Korea, Seoul is the big metropolitan area. That is the major metropole. That is where the industry is mostly centered. That's where the population is primarily centered. And it is extremely vulnerable. So something that could be done to reduce that vulnerability of Seoul would be good for all parties if that could happen. But with that said, you have Kim Jong Un and his rather hermit kingdom sort of lineage family there, and doing something with them that could really substantially change the dynamic is highly questionable. I just don't know how committed he is to doing so. There's been a number of things done over the years to build common economic projects and stuff like that, and you just seen where Kim Jong Un gets upset and he shuts everything down. And he's done that over and over again. And it's tough to get investment capital going someplace when you have somebody who, is clearly so mercurial that he will do things like that.
Looking at video of something we thought we would never see back in 2019, the U.S. president stepping foot into North Korea briefly. Of course, back then, there was also a trilateral meeting between Kim Jong Un, President Trump, and South Korea's president back then. We are hearing, by the way, before we let you go, Hal, this is just coming in from Lucas Tomlinson, who's aboard Air Force One. Apparently, there was a press gaggle. They were able to ask Trump some questions. Trump says meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un while visiting Korea is not likely. Quote, "Our focus is now on tomorrow with China, and I want to make that focus. But we'll come back and, well, at some point in the not too distant future, and meet with North Korea," Trump said. So until then, we hadn't really gotten a clear yes or a no as to whether or not a North Korea meeting was going to happen. Looks like Trump saying it's not likely. We have to leave it there, Hal. Hal is the host of the Strat podcast. You can listen to Strat anywhere podcasts are available. Good to see you.
Hey, great to see you, Austin.